I used to think the worst thing a child could do to you was forget your birthday. Turns out, forgetting is almost gentle compared to what comes after. Forgetting is absence. What my son did went far beyond that. He tried to erase me while I was still breathing. My name is Lila. I am 78 years old. And this little brick house with the cracked front steps and squeaky screen door has been my world for 42 of those years. The walls know my voice. The floorboards know the weight of my grief. Even the radiator seems to sigh when the rain starts. Old houses understand old women in a way children sometimes don't. For most of my life, if you'd asked about my greatest accomplishment, I would have said my son. Not the sewing I did for 30 years, not the balanced checkbooks. Not surviving widowhood when I still woke up reaching for a body that wasn't there. No, it was always him, Marcus, my boy with the big brown eyes and stubborn jaw who used to fall asleep on my chest while I pretended to be a mountain that could not move. The day he left me alone on my 75th birthday, something inside me cracked. It didn't break all at once. Cracks are quieter than that. They spread slowly, like frost on a window. Until one morning, you wake up and realize the view you thought you knew is gone. That night is a memory I carry like a bruise I keep bumping by accident. I had baked my own cake. Isn't that a funny little humiliation? There I was, an old woman in a kitchen meant for two, sifting flour by myself and humming songs my mother used to hum when she thought no one was listening. Chocolate, with the good cocoa because I still had some pride. I set one plate on the table, then another, leaving space for Marcus and his wife, Tiffany, and the grandbaby I'd never been allowed to hold long enough to smell his hair properly. 7 o'clock came and went. 8 o'clock, and the frosting had started to crust over at the edges. At 8:30, my phone buzzed. Not a call, a photo. Marcus, shirtless, at a resort pool, holding a neon drink in a plastic cup. Tiffany in oversized sunglasses, pouting for the camera. The baby in the corner of the frame, wearing a tiny "Wish you were here, Ma," the caption said, with a little heart and a palm tree. I remember staring at that heart. That stupid little red shape, bleeding joy onto my screen while my cake sat untouched. They were in Jamaica. I had no idea. They'd booked the trip with the emergency credit card I'd given him just in case. And just in case, apparently, meant in case we want to celebrate your birthday somewhere prettier, without you. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, the light from the phone painting my hands blue, listening to the refrigerator hum and the clock tick and the sound of my own heartbeat asking, over and over, how did we get here? I lit one candle. Just one. I didn't sing. That felt like begging. I blew it out and went to bed without tasting the cake. The next morning, I called the bank. People talk about revenge like it has to be loud and sharp, something that leaves visible scars. Mine started with a hold music song and a very polite woman named Cheryl, who walked me through closing cards and changing passwords. My voice never shook. I spoke slowly, carefully, like I was reading instructions from somewhere deep inside my chest. After that, I called Attorney Patel. He'd handled our mortgage back when my husband was still alive. A thin man with kind eyes and a mind like a locked safe. I told him I wanted to update my will. He didn't ask why. Smart men don't ask questions they already know the answers to. We sat at his desk, the surface so clear it looked like ice. Are you sure, Mrs. Grant? He asked. When I told him I wanted to remove Marcus as sole heir. This is a significant change. I am old, I said, not whimsical. He smiled at that, just a little, then slid his glasses up his nose and did exactly as I asked. I had always thought the house would go to Marcus. It's what we tell ourselves as mothers, that everything we have is on loan until they come to collect. But as I sat there in that office, the smell of photocopy toner and stale coffee wrapping around me, I realized my life had never been just a down payment on his comfort, so I left. The house, the small savings, the bonds my husband bought back when stamps were cheap and hope was cheaper, to a literacy trust that funds community libraries and adult reading programs. I know what it is to love words but be denied access to them. No child of mine was going to turn my life into a trophy while the world outside stayed starved of stories. We signed. We stamped. We shook hands. I tucked the new will into a folder. In my hall closet, behind the old coats no one wears anymore. It sat there like a secret with a steady heartbeat. For a while, things got very quiet. Marcus stopped calling, except for short, stiff conversations about checking in. Tiffany's chirpy group texts dried up. No more requests for help with daycare costs. No more sudden emergencies that sounded suspiciously like shopping trips. At first, the silence hurt. It felt like standing in a house after a party ends, finding glitter on the floor and empty cups on every surface. And realizing you've been hosting ghosts. But quiet can be a teacher, if you let it. I began to fill my days with small, deliberate acts. I joined the Tuesday crochet circle at the community center. I volunteered at the library, shelving books by feel more than sight. I planted herbs in chipped teacups on the windowsill. Life shrank, but it didn't disappear. It became precise. Months passed. The wound scabbed. I thought, foolishly, that this was the bottom. That he'd hurt me as much as a child can hurt a mother. And the rest of my days would be about learning to live around that missing limb then. On an ordinary Thursday, someone knocked on my door. No one knocks properly anymore. They jab. 3 impatient taps, like they're afraid the house might bite. I was in the kitchen, hands dusted with flour. Kneading bread because that's what my grandmother did when the world made no sense. I wiped my fingers on a towel, walked down the narrow hall, and opened the door. Marcus stood on the porch, holding a bouquet of grocery store lilies, not the good kind. The kind that smell like a funeral parlor trying to cover anything too honest. Tiffany hovered behind him in a beige coat, her lipstick too bright for daytime. A little crease of annoyance already forming between her brows because my front step wasn't clean enough for her standards. "Ma," he said, using the voice he used on customer service lines and pastors, the one made of sugar over ice. "You look great." I did not look great. I hadn't bothered with lipstick. My hair was in the same loose bun it always is. But I held the door open and let them step into my little living room. Because that's what you do when your past walks in wearing your child's face. And then I saw the third person. He was standing just behind them, out of sight from the street. A man in his early 50s, maybe, with neatly trimmed silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him the air of someone used to being believed. He carried a leather satchel and wore a soft gray sweater over a button-down professional, non-threatening, calibrated double quotes. "Mrs. Grant," he said, his voice warm as tea that's been sitting out too long. "I'm Dr. Collins. I've heard so much about you." "No, you haven't," I thought. But I nodded, because my mother raised me to be polite, even when strangers show up at my door with the smell of trouble. Clinging to them, Marcus set the lilies on my coffee table without asking where I'd like them. Tiffany sat on the edge of the sofa as if contact with my cushions might stain her. Dr. Collins took the armchair opposite mine, unbuttoned his satchel, and pulled out a notebook with my name already written at the top. I sat in my chair by the window. The fabric was worn smooth from decades of evenings. The sunlight hit the left side of my face. I angled my body so I could see all 3 of them at once. The way you watch a stage when you know the actors are about to lie. "We're so glad you agreed to see us," Tiffany began, her smile stretched tight enough to squeak. "We've been really worried." "That's so," I said. "Yes," Marcus jumped in. "We've been talking a lot, Ma, about everything, and we realized we didn't handle things right. We thought maybe, with some help, we could. You know," he made a vague gesture, fingers fluttering in the air like they'd lost their script. "Heal as a family," Dr. Collins supplied smoothly. "That's what I'm here for. To facilitate a conversation. Sometimes, having a neutral party helps." Neutral. The word sat between us like a little stone covered in sugar. I have lived long enough to know when I'm being sold something. A cleaner, a promise, a version of myself. My stomach tightened, but my face did what it's always done when life tried to pull one over on me. It smoothed out. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Dr. Collins began with questions that sounded reasonable. How was I sleeping? Did I go out often? Did I have friends nearby? He nodded sympathetically when I said I lived alone. "That can feel isolating at your age," he said. "At your age," the phrase pricked, but I let it slide past. He asked me to talk about the birthday. When I described the cake and the photo and the silence, his eyes flickered, just once, toward Marcus. It was a flash of annoyance, quickly buried. He recovered with a little sigh and said, "That must have been very painful." "It was clarifying," I said. He made a note, then the questions shifted. Less about feelings, more about facts. "What day of the week is it today, Mrs. Grant? Can you remember 3 words from your orange table? Penny in. Repeat them in a few minutes. What did you have for breakfast yesterday? Do you ever misplace things and think someone stole them? Strange, how questions can feel like hands. Some gentle, some digging in your pockets looking for loose change. He moved between years like stepping stones in a river, never letting me rest on one long enough to feel steady. Childhood, bills, my husband's death, my medication schedule. I answered, slowly, plainly. When I didn't remember something exactly, I said so. Not with apologies, just truth. Memory is not a filing cabinet, it is a wind. Sometimes the papers scatter. While he spoke, Tiffany sat very still at the far end of the sofa. Her phone rested in her lap, face down, the edge of the case barely visible beneath her palm. Every so often, her thumb would shift, just enough to keep the screen awake. And there, when the angle caught it, was the tiniest red light. Recording. I felt my heartbeat climb up the back of my throat. I took a breath and pressed it back down, the way you press a rising loaf before it spills over the pan. Anger would be a gift to them. It would be a headline. Hysterical senior becomes agitated during care visit. So I let my eyelids flutter once. Let my gaze drift toward the window as if his questions were making me tired. Let my hands twist slightly in my lap. Not a performance. Just an allowance. They wanted me small and confused. I could let them believe that. For now, do you ever feel like people are out to get you? Dr. Collins asked suddenly, pen poised. I smiled. It probably unnerved him more than any outburst would have. Sometimes, I said, particularly when they arrive unannounced with strangers and cameras. He blinked, thrown off script for half a second. Cameras. Tiffany's thumb froze. The red light on her phone burned like a tiny accusing eye. Marcus shifted in his seat. Dr. Collins cleared his throat. I think we're getting off track. This is about your safety, Mrs. Grant. He said it so smoothly, like safety and control were the same word. He kept me there for almost an hour. The room felt smaller by the end, like the walls had leaned in to listen better. When he finally closed his notebook and slipped his pen back into his pocket, my neck ached from holding my head up. Well, he said, turning to Marcus and Tiffany with a face composed of concern and something like pity, thank you for inviting me. I'll review my notes and send you my thoughts. My thoughts. Not a diagnosis, not a recommendation. Thoughts. Loose and dangerous, like nails in a bag. He stood, Marcus stood, Tiffany stood. No one moved to help me up, and I didn't ask. The old armchair and I have an understanding. I pushed myself to my feet and walked them to the door. In the entryway, Marcus hesitated. For a moment, I saw my boy as he'd been at 10, caught with his pockets full of stolen peach halves from Mrs. Jenkins' tree, guilty, defensive, unsure which parent he was going to get, the soft one or the storm. Ma, he started. Then the new Marcus, the one that belongs to Tiffany, and the reflection in his car windows, snapped back into place. We're just trying to help. You might be mad now, but you'll thank us later. I don't remember asking, I said. He flinched like the words were coins I'd thrown too hard into his hands. Tiffany didn't bother with the act. She gave me a look so icy it burned and brushed past. Dr. Collins put a hand on my arm, just for a second. Light, professional, but claiming space. It's very brave of you to allow this, Mrs. Grant, he said. These transitions can be difficult. And then they were gone. The door shut with a soft click that sounded nothing like final, but everything like forewarning. I stood there with my back to the wood, listening to their footsteps fade on the path, the murmur of their voices as they reached the car. The lilies on my table were already starting to open. Their smell too sweet, cloying, a perfume trying to smother something sour. My hands were shaking. The anger that I'd kept folded neatly during that hour started to unfurl, big and unwieldy. I walked, slowly, to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and watched the surface ripple as I tried not to throw the glass against the wall. They hadn't come to make amends. They hadn't come to stitch what they'd torn. They had come to measure me for a cage. I sat down at the kitchen table. The wood was nicked and stained and familiar under my palms. I pressed my fingers there like roots. Don't you dare fall apart now, I told myself quietly. Not when they are counting on it. I took 3 deep breaths, in through my nose, out through my mouth. The way the grief counselor had taught us after Harold died. On the 4th one, I reached for my phone, not for Marcus, not for Tiffany, for May. May isn't my sister by blood, but sometimes sisters are chosen in laundromats and hospital waiting rooms instead of in wombs. We met 30 years ago, 2 women with tired backs and sharp eyes, folding other people's shirts and sharing stories to stay awake, somewhere between stain removal tips and recipes. We became a kind of family that doesn't require DNA. She'd retired from the bench 5 years ago, Judge May Hargrove. I used to tease her that she looked too small to hold that much power. But I'd watched full-grown men shrink under her questions. A black robe had never changed the way she laughed. Though like a church bell on a clear morning, she answered on the second ring. Lila, you okay? You sound like your jaws clenched. They brought someone, I said. A doctor, to my house. I told her everything. The cheap flowers. The therapist. The questions that were less about healing and more about catching me slipping. Tiffany's recording. The way Marcus had said help and meant control. On the other end of the line, I could hear May's breathing slow as she listened. No interruptions, no little noises of sympathy. Just silence shaped carefully around my words so they wouldn't fall apart. When I finished, there was a pause. The kind you get when the air pressure changes before a storm. Okay, she said finally. The warmth had left her voice. What replaced it was steel. Okay, first thing, you are not crazy. You are not losing it. They are playing a long, dirty game, and I have seen enough of these to know how they go. My throat tightened. So I'm not overreacting. Overreacting. She let out a dry laugh. Honey, you're under. They didn't just hurt your feelings. They started building a paper trail to take your life out from under. You, conservatorship, guardianship. I bet you $50. There's already a draft petition sitting on some paralegal's desk with your name spelled wrong. The word sat between us, heavy and ugly. Conservatorship. It sounded like a museum term, a way to keep things preserved behind glass. Except I was not a painting. I was not a relic. I was a woman with a favorite mug and opinions about the weather. What do? I asked. The question tasted like rust. I'd spent my life solving my own problems with a needle, a spreadsheet, a late-night cry into a dish towel. Asking for help felt like peeling skin off. You wait, May said. You breathe, and you let them make the first official move. Paper, not performance. Once they file, they can't pretend it was all a misunderstanding. Until then, you write down everything you remember about today. Time, questions, where they sat, what you saw on her phone. Details are oxygen in court. I looked around the kitchen. My notebook was on the counter. The one where I wrote grocery lists and little reminders like water basil and call the plumber. I pulled it toward me, flipped past the ordinary days, and started a new page. And Lila, May added, her tones softening just a hair. We're going to get ahead of this. I know someone, a real specialist, not some quack who does living room jogs. You're going to get a full cognitive workup at the hospital. Not because I think you need to prove anything to me, but because we need proof for people who haven't earned the right to doubt you. I could feel my shoulders dropping, inch by inch, as if someone was slowly lifting bags off my back. You really think? I really think, she cut in, that your son and his wife just picked a fight with the wrong old lady. I spent 3 decades watching families pull stunts like this on the bench. Most of the mothers didn't have anyone. You do, so we're going to use that. I closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, the living room replayed in fragments. The way Dr. Collins' pen scratched, the flicker of red on Tiffany's phone, the lilies wilted slightly at the edges. May's voice grounded me. I'll call Dr. Senga tomorrow. He runs geriatrics at St. Michael's. He owes me a favor. We'll get you in for testing. And Lila, yes, do not call Marcus. Do not text Tiffany. Do not give them anything to twist. If they want a war, let them put their name on it in ink first. After we hung up, the house felt different. Not lighter, but less like a trap and more like a fortress. The walls hadn't moved. The clock still ticked. The bread still rose under its damp towel. But there was a new undercurrent in the air. Like the first distant rumble of thunder on a hot day. I spent the rest of the afternoon writing. Every question I could remember. Every glance exchanged between them. The way Marcus wouldn't quite meet my eye when Dr. Collins asked about money. The way Tiffany's smile tightened when I answered clearly. By evening, my hand ached. I put the pen down and flexed my fingers, staring at the ink on the page. My handwriting has always leaned a little to the right, like it's walking uphill. That day, the letters looked sharper than usual, angrier. I made myself a bowl of soup, sat by the window, watched the sun go down behind the line of houses across the street, their roofs forming a crooked horizon. Somewhere, not that many miles away. My son was probably telling someone a story about his difficult mother. About how she was slipping, about how it broke his heart. Yes. If anyone tells you otherwise, you send them to me. On the bus ride home, I looked out the window at the city passing by. People hurrying, cars honking, a woman cursing at a parking ticket, a teenager laughing into his phone, life moving in all directions at once, while mine narrowed to a thin, bright line of focus. I held the manila envelope with my preliminary results inside it against my chest like a shield. 3 weeks later, the certified letter arrived. The mailman didn't meet my eyes when he handed it over. Thick white envelope, my name spelled correctly for once. A return address, bearing the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. I closed the door gently, carried it to the kitchen table, and laid it down like it might explode. It didn't. It just sat there, heavy with intent. I took a breath, opened it. The words were cold. Formal. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. My son's name and Tiffany's, right there in black ink, as interested parties. Page after page of accusations dressed up in legal language, evidence of cognitive decline. Erratic behavior regarding testamentary documents. Inability to manage financial affairs safely. It read like a stranger's obituary. Attached, stapled neatly at the back, was Dr. Collins' report. My living room ambush, translated into paragraphs of clinical-sounding lies. Patient exhibited confusion regarding time. Patient displayed difficulty recalling recent events. Patient expressed beliefs regarding her son and daughter-in-law, persecutory beliefs. As if fear of being hunted made you untrustworthy, not the people tracking your scent. I read every word. Twice. Then a third time. Slower. By the end, my fingertips were numb where they pressed the paper. On the last page, there was a line that made me laugh. Sharp and bitter. It is the belief of the petitioners that Mrs. Grant would be better served in a supervised residential setting, where her safety and finances can be appropriately managed. A supervised residential setting. A nice facility. A place with puzzles and group bingo and a locked drawer for medications. Somewhere with visiting hours my son wouldn't keep. They wanted my house, so they'd decided to put me in one. I didn't cry. I picked up my phone, scrolled to May's name, and pressed call. They filed, I said, when she answered. Good, she replied. Now we get to work. And as the late afternoon light slanted across my kitchen table, turning the white paper a pale gold, I realized something fierce had settled into my bones. They thought they were dragging me into a courtroom as a victim. What they'd really done was invite me to the only place left where the truth could stand up, clear and tall, and look them in the eye. And I was ready.